Hello, everybody. Good afternoon or evening, depending where you are right now. Thank you so much for being able to attend our Contemporary Romance Bookstore Day celebration. My name is Lauren. I am with Creating Conversations Bookstore. We are hosting the event this year. And I would like to just go ahead and get started so we can get to our fantastic guests and authors. Today, we will be having the event hosted by Judy Prince-Neeb. She is a children's librarian with the South Pasadena Public Library. She works with San Diego Independent Bookstore and Mysterious Galaxy to host a monthly romance book club. Judy also loves the horror and gothic genre as well as speculative fiction. She's been with her husband for more than 17 years since they met at the Seattle International Film Festival. And I know she's just as excited as I am about this event, and I know it's going to be a lot of fun. So Judy, I will go ahead and give the screen over to you. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lauren. Hello, wonderful people out there, and welcome to Bookstore Romance Day, where we are celebrating bookstores, romance, and everything in between. Again, my name is Judy Prince-Neeb, and I will be your moderator today. I'm going to start out by introducing our amazing, fantastic panelists. First off, I have Ginny Baird, who is a New York Times and US Today bestselling author. She writes sweet contemporary romances with a dash of humor and a whole lot of heart. She's published over 35 novels and novellas, both with traditional presses and independently, and is a top 10 bestseller on Kindle, iBooks, and Nook. Ginny, who is also of Puerto Rican heritage, often incorporates Latinx culture in her work. She has titles with Entangled Publishing and Hallmark Publishing, with other exciting projects in the works. You can learn more about her at www.jennybairdromance.com. Our next panelist is Julie Hammerle. She is a US Today best-selling Rita-nominated author, and she writes romantic comedies for adults and teens. Before settling down to write for real, she studied opera, taught Latin, and held her real estate license for one hot minute. Currently, when not writing, she ropes people into conversations about Game of Thrones and makes excuses to avoid the gym. Her favorite YA-centric TV shows include 90210, Original Spice, agree, Luke Perry, Felicity, Freaks and Geeks, and her music playlist reads like a 1997 Lilith Fair set list. She lives in Chicago with her husband and her 2 kids and a dog. Our next author is Jayci Lee, who writes poignant, sexy, and laugh-out-loud romance every free second she can scavenge, and is semi-retired from her 15-year career as a defense litigator. She loves food, wine, and traveling, and incidentally, so do her characters in books like The Dating Dare and A Sweet Mess. Jayci lives in sunny California with her tall, dark, and handsome husband, 2 amazing boys with boundless energy, and a fluffy rescue whose cuteness is a major distraction. Our next author is Christina Pishiris, who was born in London to Greek, and I know I'm going to butcher this word, so I apologize, Cyprus parents who used to bribe her to go to family weddings by promising that George Michael might be there. To deal with the inevitable disappointment, which I would be disappointed too, she began scribbling stories on napkins and has been writing ever since. She started her career as a journalist, specializing in the TV industry before going freelance. Since meeting her filmmaker husband, she's also moved into production, working on music documentaries. Her hobbies include compelling cheesy 80s playlists, coveting the neighbor's cat, and writing protest letters to Grulien after they discontinued her favorite perfume. You'll have to ask, I have to ask you about that later because I don't think I know that one. Love Songs for Skeptics is her debut. Our next author is LaQuette, who writes savvy, sexy, contemporary romance. She is the 2016 Author of the Year Golden Apple Award winner, 2016's Right Touch Reader's Choice winner, and a 2018 Passionate Plum finalist. She is an advocate for diverse romance in the publishing industry. LaQuette, a native of Brooklyn, lives in the mountains with her book boyfriend husband and their 2 rambunctious kids. Visit her at laquette.com. And then our next author is And I know she said it, this sounds like Australia, so Karelia, and I know I probably butchered that, so I apologize, is Stetz-Waters, remembers a time when happy endings romantic love was a holy grail she thought she would never find. Stories about lesbians all ended tragically. At 17, she was certain the best she could hope for was to die nobly for the woman she loved, who would never love her back, of course. 4 years later, she saw her true love across a crowded room, and they have been together for 20 plus years. Knowing that happily ever after is possible, oh, wait a minute. My thing just went out, so I apologize. There we go. Knowing that happily ever after is possible for everyone, Stetz-Waters has made it her life's mission to craft happy endings about women finding true love with other women. She's also on a quest to spread cliteracy across the country, using her work as a romance writer to teach readers about female sexual autonomy, desire, and pleasure. When she's not shopping for model clitorises or writing love stories, she's teaching writing at a community college in rural Oregon, where her students inspire her every day with their bravery, creativity, and perseverance. She also teaches for the Golden Crown Literacy Society Writing Academy, a creative writing program for queer women. It's been her honor to mentor writers who are now her peers and colleagues. She also loves to garden, draw, and play with her pug mix, Willa Cather. All right, I think we've gotten everybody. Thank you so much again for being here. Because it's Bookstore Romance Day, I would love for everyone to talk about, do you remember your first romance you purchased or even read? And do you have a favorite movie, a favorite memory of a bookstore or a library? And anyone can go first.
I definitely remember my first romance novels. I was 16 years old, in a junior in high school, and I used to see a friend of mine come in every day with what I now know are Harlequin Presents. And one day I just said to her, "Why are you always bringing those trashy books to school?" And she shut me down and asked me, "Have you ever read one?" And I hadn't. So she said, "Maybe you should read it before you judge it." And she gave me The Devil's Price by Carol Mortimer. And I finished it in a night. I couldn't. I went back to school the next day. I was voracious. And then at that point, every day after school, I was in my local library. Like that's actually caused me to go get a library card. And every day after that, I was in my local library getting more romance novels to feed my habit.
I guess I'll go. Well, the romance book that I read started with Kisses for Sale. It's a middle grade romance, and I was in 7th grade. And I read that book in a single sitting. And that's when I discovered I love reading. I remember like running to my mom when she came home from work saying, "Mom, I love reading." And since then, I moved on to Harlequin romances. My best friend was my supplier until I discovered the paperback racks at the local library. And I started taking a string bag and borrowing like the maximum number. I think it was 10. Like every week, I would get 10 romance novels and then go through them and come back the next weekend, get 10 more. And I just remember reading through like the whole, there's like 6 to 8 racks of paperback romances. And I remember reading through all of them before the end of my senior year.
My first was Patience and Sarah by Isabel Miller, which is like the classic #1 lesbian romance published in 1979, but before that it was passed around in hard copy among different communities because it was still illegal to mail gay literature. And I found it at Powell's Bookstore in Portland, big, huge, like city block sized bookstore in their gay section. And just by coincidence happened to pick up as my first, like basically iconically the first lesbian romance.
I'll go next. When I was at school age, I veered between two very distinctive types of romance. The really sweet ones, and does anyone else remember Sweet Dreams? It was a series of books, and there were hundreds and hundreds, and we just go through them voraciously, me and my sister. And then the other books that I read a lot of, they were so inappropriate. The Bonkbusters, the Jilly Cooper, the Shirley Conran, the Sidney Sheldon. Does anyone remember Flowers in the Attic? That was completely inappropriate for school kids. But anyway, yeah, once you know those books exist out there, your mind is blown. So that's been that was my childhood reading.
Oh, to spin off of that, Sidney Sheldon was one of my first grown up books, and my mom told me to read it. She's like, "Oh, you'll really like it," and I started reading it. I was like, "Oh, you recommended this, Mom?" But that one really, I think, brought me to the. I always liked romance in my novels, but I think that kind of opened my eyes to well, there's a lot out there. Because before that, it was a lot of Babysitter's Club and getting to the bookstore on the first day of the month with my best friend whenever we knew that the new book would be out. That was our big thing. But I also remember going to the grocery store and my mom picking up Danielle Steele's Jewels for me there. And that one kind of, I think, whet my appetite for romance too.
I wish I could remember the name, but I was at a beach house with a friend and her family, and I don't know, maybe it was 13 or 14. And you know how beach houses have books on the shelf? And there was this one that my friend's sister had taken and was reading and put under her pillow and got in big trouble for reading that. And I was like, I gotta see what that book is. And it was a romance book. It was early, gosh, I don't know. I wish I knew the author, but it was probably an early Harlequin or maybe even a Silhouette from when Silhouette was its own imprint. But there was a car crash and there was amnesia and there was sex and I was like, this is good stuff. And I went and I looked for more, at the library. And yeah, it was just, I hadn't read any, and there was romance and the love story, which was really what drew me in. I just thought it was a very cool mix of stuff, and it was cool to have the happily ever after. I mean, before that, I had read Dreyer, the literary kind of stuff in school, but this was fun stuff. And I thought, oh yeah, I like this. So it was a good introduction, and I wish I could give credit to that author. In fact, this afternoon I was Googling trying to see if I could find what that book was, but I'm sorry. But it was one of those beach house discoveries.
We'll have to talk later because as a librarian, I can probably maybe find something. I can do a deep dive somewhere.
Oh, yeah.
And Christina, thank you for your mentioning Flowers in the Attic, because that helped me introduce romance as well as my love of Gothic. So I got a 2-for-1 in there.
I have to blame that on my best friend. She gave me all the really inappropriate books, but I thank her for it still. So.
Well, then this leads into, what led you to being a transition from being a romance reader to becoming a romance writer? This is for everyone. So whoever wants to jump in.
I'll go first because I think mine might be the youngest. And it was a hard question for me. I wasn't sure, but I thought of one time in my life that definitely foretold my career as a very open door sex scene type romance writer. My latest is set in a sex toy store. It's all about, the female pleasure and the clitoris. And I remember when I learned to read really late. So I was like 7 or 8 when I learned to read. And now I'd be diagnosed with something, but back then it was just fine. I was a little slow, but it was all right. So we were living in France and we didn't have a lot of money, and we didn't have a lot of children's books in English. So my mother would read to me, and she was reading me Anne McCaffrey, was like a science fiction. There were dragons and stuff. It was an adult novel, but that's what we had in the apartment. So she was reading that to me. I was like 7 going on 8, and I really didn't read. And she got to the sex scene and she got embarrassed and she said, I'm not going to read this to you. If you want to read it yourself, you can, but I'm not going to. And she left the book with me and she left the room, and I picked up the book and I read the sex scene, and I started reading adult level novels from then on out, and reading grade level in French. And it was like, you know, I've always been slow but emphatic. Took a long time to get there, but then I was there. And I still remember the description that some pleasure was exquisite to the point of pain. And I was 8. I had no idea what that was about. But that moment made me a reader out of nothing. And I think that was the beginning of my romance career.
For me, I read those Harlequin novels for about 2 years. And then I realized that in those presents, because I don't think I knew of any other romance lines at the time, that's what was present in my local library. There was never anyone that looked like me. There were never any curvy Black chicks from Brooklyn. So I decided I wanted to write curvy Black chicks from Brooklyn and see them get a happily ever after. And I think that probably happened somewhere between 18 and 20, where I started like writing stories that was pretty much just all dialogue. It was terrible, like poor structure. It was so bad. But the seed was planted, and I wanted to write me into romance novels.
For me, I think I was 14 when I decided that I wanted to write one of these books that I love reading, that has become such a integral part of like my teenage years. And it didn't even occur to me that there were no characters who looked like me on the cover or in the stories at all. I thought that was how it was supposed to be. And that's what frustrates me, that the society that I grew up with gave me such a narrow vision. And it wasn't until I was older that I realized I needed to be part of the change to broaden that perspective for the young readers out there who love romance like I did. And but it wasn't until I was like almost 40 when I finally decided to really sit down and write a novel. I practiced as an attorney for 15 years, and I took a break because it was taking a toll on me. It seems like I was meant to be a writer, really. And during that time off, I thought, if I don't write a book now, I might never get a chance to do it again. So I sat down and wrote my first book, A Sweet Mess, in 2 months. It just poured out of me. And I wrote another book in 3 months. And that's just how I transitioned into becoming a romance author.
I would say the books that influenced me to want to become a writer are all those brilliant 90s, we called at the time chick lit, but like the Bridget Jones, for example, because at the time when that came out, I was working as a journalist, and I was on the train going to the Edinburgh TV festival, and Bridget, in the book, Bridget goes to that as well, and I couldn't believe that I was doing. It was so lovely to see sort of city girls and in a sort of career that you're quite aspirational but also still quite relatable. So Bridget Jones, and then afterwards people like Lisa Jewell. She writes more sort of thrillers now, but she started off writing like Ralph's Party was a wonderful book. So those are the two authors I would say that influenced me the most, made me want to do it.
It's nice that you mentioned Bridget Jones, because that, for me, part of my influence was not just books, but it was also the movies and the romantic comedy films that I saw, because that's what I write, is rom-coms. And I think just that feeling you have, same feeling you have when you finish the book or when you walk out of the theater and you just feel so uplifted, like everything is right, even for a moment. And I think for me, I thought, that's a gift. That's a real gift that somebody can provide that feeling to people. And then I realized that I wanted to be part of that action, that I wanted to help provide that feeling too, because in the world there's a lot of stuff that goes on that's not so great in everyday life, and I thought that'd be really nice to be able to do that. I had tried my hand at different kinds of writing over the years. I had taught school for a while. I'd worked for the State Department early on, and then I'd written for a parenting magazine. I'd written greeting cards. I'd done all sorts of writing, but I'd always really wanted to write a book. And so when I sat down and disciplined myself to finally write something, I thought, what do I want to write? What's a natural fit for me? And I thought, well, what do I love reading and watching at the movies? And it was romance. So that just seemed to be the right area for me. And I wrote that first book, and that was some years ago under a different name, but it worked out. And so here I am, and I love it still. So it was a long journey. It didn't happen in my 20s or anything, but I always did kind of want to write. I just had to find my way into the right genre and the right place.
I'm kind of in the same boat as you, Ginny, because I was writing a lot of other things. I was like writing screenplays and like critiquing TV, all that kind of stuff. And I was working on some like serious contemporary YA, and we went to a house with my parents for Thanksgiving one year, and my dad, who he's like 6'3", big guy, mustache. He looks like one of the Bears super fans from SNL. And all he wanted to watch all weekend was the Hallmark movies that were that were coming up for Christmas. And so we just kind of all of us sat there watching that. It was just on all day long. And I started thinking about those, all the towns there that are Christmas themed, like what happens to them the other 11 months of the year. So I went back to my editor and pitched a YA series about a Christmas town that was like, the first book is set at Valentine's Day instead of at Christmas. Like, what are they doing when during the rest of the year? So, and I really love it. I've always loved rom-coms. I've always loved that. And in reading, when I'm reading, it always has to have a romance subplot or I'm going to be bored. Any movie I watch has to have romance. So it's a natural fit. It just took me a little bit to get there.
I love it. And audience members, don't forget, click on, if you have a question for our amazing authors, we want to hear it. We will have a time for questions later on. So go ahead and make sure that you put them in ASAP. All right. And then this is a good segue too, because I mean, we talked about, kind of the inspirations as well, but what does it mean to write your own heroes or heroines? Just having, being able to have your voice heard in this particular fashion.
I'll go first since I went last. I'll jump in. So I started out writing YA, but then Entangled was branching into like older characters. They were starting up a line for characters like 35 and up, but like, 40-ish. And I was approaching 40 at the time. And it kind of hit me that like, I couldn't see past 40. Like, I knew like my 20s, my 30s, I got it. And then it was kind of like, well, now what, And I realized that there's just not a lot of representation of older characters. And even though I know at my age, I feel like more confused than I did at 15. There's a lot going on. I know that with my friends, that are going through divorces or getting married for the first time, all at this age, having babies at 40. So I really enjoy being able to explore like older characters. So I really like focusing on that now. And there, there's more nuance. There's just a whole different vibe And I'm happy to be able to bring those characters to life.
I guess I'll go. For me, writing my hero and like heroines is about giving voice to Asian American characters who I think remain a mystery other than various stereotypes to many people out there. I just wanted to share my experience and the shared experiences of Asian Americans with the rest of America, that we are also part of this culture, we're part of the fabric of this country too. And there are more similarities than differences. And I just wanted to show also main characters who are Asian American, to show that, we could have wicked sense of humor, we could be sexy, and we could have jobs other than, I don't know, engineers and doctors. And I wanted to explore successful Asian American characters in non-traditional professions as well. So for me, writing Asian American characters is a privilege and a mission.
For me, it was very similar experience as Jayci, in wanting to share the world that I grew up in and my experience in my existence. And I remember distinctly reading a book by Zane titled Shame on It All. And it was a story about three sisters who were going through various relationship issues. But at the core, reading it, all the things that were happening and the ways that people were speaking and the things that were going on in the relationship between the three sisters, I was like, oh my God, that's my mother and my aunties. Like I've heard them have this conversation. I've heard them, act like this and respond like this. And it was one of the first times that I'd read a book featuring Black characters that was a positive story. It was a fun story. It wasn't steeped in the struggle. And so it was like, wow, this is great. We need more work like this. I need to write stuff like this because more of these stories need to exist.
I really relate to that because even though my characters are sort of second generation Greek, the thing that I really wanted to do was to write about a woman who was very successful in her career rather than being in the usual journey. I think for the heroine tends to be from sort of not having a great career or not having the right job and then getting to the right job. And I just thought, I'm going to make her the editor of this music magazine that's got loads of cachet and really successful. And I just want, that's just a given. I'm not going to have her struggling or anything like that. All the struggles are going to come from the other parts of her life. So funnily enough, it wasn't so much I wanted to show representation of sort of, I mean, London, and you can't throw the stone without hitting another Greek, so I didn't feel like that was what I wanted to show, but it kind of just naturally came out that my character kind of had the same background to me, but it was the career sort of side of things. I just want to have that as a done deal. I don't want that as the big struggle. I didn't even want her deputy editor. I thought, nope, she's editor.
I like that so much. I love those like high-powered women, like take no prisoners. I'm already there. That's so cool. I think for me, the answer is really personal. My mom is a war refugee, and she didn't talk about it a lot, but there was this shadow over her and the family, this almost like what she wasn't saying was louder than talking about it. And she'd been in refugee camps for many years. And so I remember as I was a little kid, I would ask her, like, what do we do when that happens in America? And she said, it won't happen in America because America is a big country. And that doesn't happen to big countries. And even as a little kid, I was like, I'm not sure I buy that logic. Like I'm questioning, and I played out some of those anxieties in my games. And then when I was in high school, coming out, at about 15 in the 90s, Oregon was just ripped apart by this anti-gay movement. It's, we think about Portland now as being a super liberal place, but even now Oregon is really split between very conservative and very liberal. But back then it was a nightmare. People were getting shot, firebombed, gay organizations were getting ransacked, churches, the Catholic churches were getting ransacked because they were seen as too gay friendly. And so, that's not always their reputation. And it was just, the state was on fire, and I was a teenager and I was coming out, and I had this feeling like, this is the war. It came for my mom, and now it's coming for me. And the stories of lesbian love, most of which I just had to make up in my mind, because they weren't at the bookstore, and they weren't in the library, and they weren't really, for most part, even written or published. Those became like this shelter, this place that I could go and get away from this huge like cloud of fear. And so for me, writing these characters, what I hope most of all is to give people this place to rest their hearts. So for a little while, to forget about that cloud that we certainly know is still over us and still over so many different groups of people for so many different reasons. This little place where you could go and you could just shelter, like a cave with a little fire going in the background, and rugs on the floor. It would be okay for just like this one night. And now, even now, like, the thing that means the most to me is when I get letters from people saying, like, I read your book when I was in the hospital. I read your book when I was fleeing the wildfires. I read your book after my mother died. And it gave me like that little bit of comfort. And so for me, that's just like, it's the whole reason to do it, really. Plus I love doing it. But for me, that just ties into everything that I was and am.
Creating characters, boy, so many babies, such little time, right, with all these characters, and they're all like children to us because we create them and they're special, and they all have their own quirks and needs and vulnerabilities. And I just turned in a manuscript, and it was my 40th one. I've done indie books and indie novellas and some with publishers, so I'm hybrid, and each of those characters are special to me. And it's interesting because I am from a Puerto Rican background on my mom's side. My dad was Anglo, and so I had this bicultural home, but the Hispanic influence was very large. And at first, it didn't even occur to me. I wrote my first romance like around year 2000. That's when I said I wrote, it was under a different name. It didn't occur to me to include my culture in my romance at all. It was sort of an evolutionary process for me as I evolved and I wrote more. And I thought, this is important. I started to include a Latin character here, a Latin character there. And then I have, in this current book, the heroine is from a Puerto Rican background. And I sort of grew into it, and it feels so good to shine a light on that culture. And I've spoken to other Latinas, and some will say, well, I've talked to people who said they don't feel Latin enough or Hispanic enough to write about the culture. And I was like, well, what is Latin enough, or what is Hispanic enough? I mean, I feel it, and I'm half, but it was so much a part of my life growing up and that culture. And I spent my childhood summers in Puerto Rico, and I have relatives who only speak Spanish, and it's really nice to be able to explore that part of myself, because I think there are a lot of people who are, America is so many different groups and so many different cultures and backgrounds. And I think it's really good to have more people seen on the page, like everybody. We're seeing a trend to that now, which is really, really good. And I have had people write to me. I've done 2 books for Hallmark now. And the first one was an amnesia story, and it was actually called An Unforgettable Christmas, and it was about a Puerto Rican family. And the hero was not, he was Anglo guy, but sometimes what I'll do is I'll juxtapose that. So I have one person who is influenced by the Puerto Rican culture and one person who's new to it. So then the person who doesn't know about it can sort of learn as they explore the relationship with the other person. And that's been really neat. I mean, I had people write to me, and I'm hoping I'll hear from people too who read the Matchmaker Bride, saying that they saw themselves on the page. They were really happy to see themselves on the page in a romance, in a Christmas romance, to see that, to see the Spanglish, you know, and there are a lot of other writers now doing the same thing, but I've worked my way into that. That was not, some of you had that mission from the beginning. That's what you wanted to share. And I wish I had had that presence of mind, but it's like, it sort of came to me as I went along that, oh yeah, this is something I really should be doing. I should be exploring this part of myself and my culture. And it makes me really happy. It makes my family happy too. And I hope readers enjoy it as well. So that's kind of my story, my journey.
Thank you all. I'm going to be switching over to some great audience questions. But before I do that, just a reminder, Lauren is putting up in the chat all the links to buy all of these fabulous books, which I had the opportunity to read these before the panel, and chef's kiss, they are worth the purchase. Believe me, I'm a huge fan. In fact, I might have picked up some of the other authors who've had a lot of the other books, some of their earlier stuff as well. That's how great they are. So I am going to start with Sarah has a specific question for Christina, and is, did you have difficulty concluding the love triangle in your book? And we're not going to go into spoilers, but was it tough to decide who would win?
Hi, Sarah. I had a lot of feedback in early drafts. Before, this was long before I sent it to an agent, through, you know, my writing group, saying, you know, let's call him X and let's call the other guy Y. And they kept saying, you know, just X is so unlikable. You've got to find a way to just make it so obvious. They were saying who you're rooting for. So I really struggled to make one of the boys in the book just as likable as the other boy, but I always knew which boy she'd end up with. It was never any doubt in my mind. And I think if you've read these sorts of books, if you read enough of these books, you can tell at the end of chapter 2 who she's going to end up with, I think. But yeah, no, never any doubt. So thank you for the question.
All right, and then Alta has a question of, have you ever learned something from your own writing that you didn't expect? Something unintended that came out in your own writing? And this is for everyone.
Well, at the risk of TMI, so, you know, mute your computer, I guess, if you don't want to know. So my latest is set in a sex toy store, and one of the characters is pleasure educator. And so I started taking pleasure education classes just to see what it would be like. And some of the classes I picked based on time, like what fit into my work schedule. So, you know, wasn't even necessarily something I thought I would employ in real life. But it was super fun. And as someone who thought, you know, and did have a very nice sex life, it was delightful to find after 20 years of marriage, there were still some fun options that I had not explored yet. And my lovely wife was like, oh, okay. And I also was very, I also learned that this is the full anatomical structure of the clitoris, and this is to size. So if you didn't know, now you know. And I was also, even though I wrote very open door and what I hoped were realistic sex scenes, I was always kind of shy personally. But through the process, and for me, I guess this was like the culminating moment, through the process of researching for this book and writing the book, I got invited to do one of these storytelling shows. It's like The Moth, but it's all about sex. It's called the Mystery Box Show. And I actually got to tell a story at the Mystery Box Show. I think the last one they had before COVID. So it was a story about my sex life, which I told to an audience of 500 people, which has now been seen on YouTube over 20,000 times. And so I went from being the girl who didn't really want to wear like short sleeves because that was a little too, risque, to being the person whose sex story has been seen 20,000 times on YouTube. And it was just wonderful, liberating, fun. I felt like I had this new sense of purpose because I wanted to share what I'd learned with other people. And I hope that the book really showcases like female pleasure and female sexuality in a way that everybody who has a vulva or has sex with someone with a vulva can take home and maybe feel the same way, like, oh, I learned a little something. So it was incredibly transformative for me. No one else wants to talk about their sex life, I see.
Who can follow that? I will try. It's no sex. I think the thing that I most discover, and it's like every single book, there's something that comes out where it's like therapy for me, where just any issues I'm working through or haven't dealt with, like they come to the surface, and it always ends up like informing the theme. I just remember writing my first book, which is a YA contemporary, and I sobbing writing the story about like a friendship breakup, and it was like dealing with unresolved issues with like my childhood best friend and stuff. So I think that more than like learning, I can't think of anything like tangible I've learned, but it's just it's always like a emotional journey for me personally to write anything.
For me, I think, especially with Jackson, I mean, I'm from Brooklyn and I write a lot about Brooklyn, but my mother is the last child of 8, and all of her other brothers and sisters were born down south because my family's from the South. So I had a really heavy, the South had a really like heavy influence in my household growing up. So it was very interesting to explore and sort of relive the moments with my grandparents and how they lived and how very Southern they were, and a lot of their ideals and just the way they saw the world. So to have an opportunity, like Jackson is really an ode to my grandparents and the experience of visiting down south with family members, and going down there and just it being a totally different world from growing up as a concrete princess in Brooklyn. So I love that part of my family's history, and I loved getting to explore it as I was writing Jackson.
That's neat about the family connections. I have something similar in my writing that sometimes I will tap into a character that I feel especially close to or touched by, or I'm resolving something with, and I don't understand. Like Julie had that situation with her friend that she had broken up with or had problems with as a kid. I was writing a book, and one of the characters was an older lady, a Hispanic lady, and I was having a really hard time with writing her. And one day I just sat down and I just sobbed. I wrote a scene and I just sobbed. And then I realized, and I hadn't known this going into the book, that I was writing about my mother, and she died in 2017. And so this was something that it was like she was coming back to life on the page, and her relationship with her daughter and the grandchildren. And I didn't even know I was doing it, so that's something that sometimes I think we writers, we put ourselves into our work and we put our heart into our work. And sometimes part of your heart is people you love and care about, and they can work their way into your fiction and surprise you. And it turned out to be really good, but I had to stop and even ask if I could finish that book, because it was really raw still to me, losing her. And she was a really big influence in my life, really huge. And so I had to think, can I do this? And I need to do this, because this is a way to honor her, actually, and honor her people and honor her culture. And I need to do this. And I finished the book, and it was a good book. So, but but our fiction can surprise us in that way, the characters as well.
For me, you do learn about yourself when you write. When I wrote A Sweet Mess, the first in the series before the dating dare, it is about a baker and a food critic. And I not only explore desserts, but all kinds of food and how cooking is a way to communicate love and affection, and you know how you care about another person. And I think a lot of that comes from my culture, where for Koreans, when they greet each other, they ask, "Have you eaten?" instead of "Hello, how are you?" It's like, "Have you eaten?" You know, especially if you have a guest in the house or anything. It's very important to care for them, and that's shown through food. And it turns out I write foodie romances. And it's just how much food and the sharing of a meal has, I guess, influenced my idea of what family is and what love is, that I guess it came across the pages. So I realized how important that connection was. And as I, cook for my family, especially during the pandemic, I'm cooking 3 meals a day, every day. I have to remember it's my, love note to my boys, to my husband, or, when my mom or my mother-in-law, they cook for me, bring me food, it's their way of showing their love as well. So that is something that I've learned as a writer.
I'll just answer this really quickly. When I first submitted when my editor first got hold of my book, you go through a phase where they ask you to do quite big-ish changes. And she said to me, after having read it a couple of times, one of the boys, I won't tell you who, does something not very nice to Zoe, and she never calls him up on it. And I think we need to see this scene. And it really struck me that that's something that obviously I don't sort of naturally do in my life. And I just thought it's so good to see that, to see other female characters sort of understanding their own worth. And, just even if you can't solve an issue, you still have to bring it up. So I just thought, that really meant a lot to me that she saw that and I hadn't seen it. And I just thought I can learn something about my own life here. So yeah, stand up for yourselves.
Thank you, everyone. Sarah also has a question for Julie. I adored Right Before Christmas, and I appreciate seeing 40-something leads. She's asking, who was your favorite Game of Thrones relationship? And I will add to her question, who was your favorite Game of Thrones character, and why was it Brienne of Tarth?
It's a good question. Okay, so Brienne is definitely up there, but I've read the books a couple times too, so I'm coming at it from that angle. But I think Jaime Lannister is probably my favorite of all the characters, and not in the show. I don't want to spoil it, but I feel like they did him dirty at the end. But yeah, but throughout, Jaime's the best, and Jaime and Brienne they're a great pairing. I love them. I'm trying to think who's favorite. I never actually materializes, at least not yet. If George ever finishes the books, maybe it will, but I am a shipper of Sansa and the Hound, which I know is all kinds of wrong, but yeah. And thank you so much for reading Right Before Christmas. I'm glad. That book has a lot of Game of Thrones influences, so yeah, thank you.
So I'm going to combine the last 2 questions, and they're from Diane and Carly. And it's, how do you fit your own reading time in your daily writing routine? And what books are you reading right now that you would want to recommend?
First off, I don't write every day. I can't. I'm not going to sit here and tell that lie. So on the days when I'm goofing off and not actually working, I read a lot. And I shouldn't call it goofing off. I'm saying that in jest, but in truth, what it is refilling your well. It's really difficult to find that creativity if you don't have anything inspiring it. And so when you, especially when I read my friends in romance, I feel like, oh my God, she did that so well. He did that so well. I need to go sit down and write and do what I have to do because this is awesome, right? So anything Naima Simone writes, I'm reading. She is a phenomenal writer, and I feel like she tries to break me every time I read one of her books. The same is true for Sierra Simone. I just had the opportunity of reading Saint, an arc for Saint. I've been asking for this book for 3 years, and I finally got it. And I was so broken, I could hardly articulate how good the book was. It took me days to contact her and just tell her, like, you destroyed me. And I can't even, like, I don't know how we go on after this because I'm just done. So those two are two of my favorite authors. So anytime I need some downtime, I can pull out their work and I know I'm good.
For me, reading is my love and joy, and I use it as kind of a reward system. So I spend the day writing. I would usually set up a goal, and I'll strive to meet that goal. And some days you don't, some days you do. But afterwards, I could relax and read someone else's writing, and that's a treat that I look forward to at the end of the day. And right now, I just finished A Good Day for Chardonnay by Dorinda Jones. It's hilarious and clever and witty. I really enjoyed it. And I just started One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. So it's just, it's just brilliant from the first word. I can't emphasize that enough. So that's what I'm reading, and I definitely recommend it, even though I'm just a few pages in.
I balance writing with a full-time job, so I write for my solution to that balance is to always write first, because the job will always take over. There'll always be email. Someone will always need something. But if I write first, then that doesn't get pushed off. So I'll write from during the school year, maybe 7 to 9, then do my work. Or in the summer, lucky enough to have summers off, I'll try and write 4 or 5 hours a day, kind of treat it like a job to make up for all the rest of the time during the year when I will not be able to write 4 or 5 hours a day. But it's that bit, whether you write every day or not every day, or a lot or a little. I think it's, for me, it's really starting with the writing. Like don't let anything else push that to the side. It's not after you do the dishes. It's not after you answer this email. It's like the most important thing, if you're really committed to it. I mean, your children and your family are more important, but in terms of like productive stuff like that. And I was gonna pump One Last Stop, but Jayci, you did such a good job. It is amazing. I finished it. Oh my gosh, it is gorgeous. But I have a few others that I recommend. This latest by Alyssa Cole has a neurodivergent character, and I think that is a demographic, a group of people who we don't see getting enough happy endings, especially in love. So I think that's really cool. And Cole just draws her character beautifully. It's a dual point of view, so you can kind of see, she is eccentric from the eyes of her eventually lover. she does make her lover's head turn, like, what are you thinking? But then you see the story through her eyes and it makes perfect sense. And she's a wonderful human being. And there's a happy ending at the end, which is so, so sweet. And then if you're looking for some nonfiction, this, Becoming Cliterate by Lori Mintz, is the book that really just changed my life in terms of thinking about sexuality. So, so good. Definitely recommend it.
I will second the writing early. That's what I try to do every day. I am the opposite of you, Karelia, because I've got kids home right now who are going back to school Monday. Thank goodness, because I feel like I don't get a lot done during the summer. But then once they will go to school on Monday, I have a day job too, but it's also kind of flexible. So I try to get my writing done when they're at school. I kind of try to alternate reading nonfiction and fiction, and I like a lot of celebrity nonsense. So currently I'm reading Casey Wilson's autobiography, she was like on SNL and Happy Endings. So there's a lot of like rom-com elements to her life too. So that's an interesting book. It's called The Wreckage of My Presence. And then my daughter and I are right now reading the Betsy Tacy series by Maud Hart Lovelace, if anybody knows that from way back in the day. It's my favorite books growing up. Like I would go to the library and just keep checking them out over and over again. And then finally, when I was an adult, I realized I could just buy my own copies. So we're reading that. She has never read it and I'm forcing it on her, but hopefully she's kind of enjoying it. But that's what I'm currently reading.
I'm currently reading I Owe You One. It's Sophie Kinsella. I really love her books, sort of chick litty, British humor, always takes me away and gets me out of my head to a different place. And I just find her writing really crisp and light and good. I'm also rereading Isabel Allende's Zorro, which was a fantastic novel. I read it years ago and I found it in a secondhand bookshop. And I'm like, I got to read that again. So now I own it. I think before I must have gotten it from the library or something. But I also read nonfiction, different kinds of fiction, not only romance, sort of float around. When I'm writing on deadline, I tend not to read straight romance. When I'm writing a straight romance, I don't know why. I feel like it's like my head is in the writing. And then when I turn in the book and I got a little break, then I'll load up. Like we're going to the beach in September and I'm starting to hunt around. So I appreciate any and all recommendations that I'm getting. So
I'll just be really quick because I'm really conscious of the time, but I'm reading Sarah Skilton's Club Deception, and I just like to say everyone has to go and read everything she's ever written. That's all I'll say.
All right, it looks like it's time. As much as I want to continue the conversation, and this has been an amazing panel, and I'm so incredibly grateful for our authors for being here, our attendees for being here, creating conversations, for creating this conversation, pun intended. I just want to say thank you so much for allowing us to share romance on Bookstore Romance Day, and I'm going to turn it back over to Lauren.
Thank you so much, Judy. I have really enjoyed every second of this. I've learned a lot, more than I thought I'd be getting, but hey, I got a lot of great information. I just want to do a quick reminder for everybody that, of course, you can still purchase all their wonderful books on our website with signed book plates. If you're interested in any Jayci's books, if the Dating Dare, she will be coming by our bookstore this Tuesday. So if you're in the Redondo Beach area, please come by Creating Conversations. And we can get signed copies for you at that time, between 1 and 2 o'clock, as well as for just an extra bonus with all these wonderful books. When you order them, we will be giving away a free forever romance tote bag. So it's just like a little thank you for attending the event with us today. And on that note, I believe that's everything. Thank you all very much for attending. I hope you had a great time. and have a fantastic weekend. Thank you, all the amazing authors and Judy.